Human existence on Earth, not by evolution, but by full form, a comprehensive analysis. This document is a thorough, multidimensional study of one of the most profound questions ever asked by the human mind. Where did human beings come from? This is not a simple question with a simple answer. It touches the very core of what it means to be human, our origin, our purpose, our consciousness, our soul, and our relationship with the Creator. This study approaches the question from every possible angle, using science, philosophy, logic, analogy, spirituality, anthropology, intelligent design, Islamic wisdom, and other dimensions of understanding, to demonstrate one clear and consistent truth. Human beings did not arrive on this earth through a slow, random, unguided evolutionary process. They were placed here by the deliberate, perfect, and magnificent design of Allah, in full form, with full capacity, full consciousness, and full purpose from the very first moment of their existence. Section 1. Introduction. The central question of human origin. Every civilization in human history has asked the same question: who are we, and how did we come to be here? From the ancient philosophers of Greece to the scholars of the Islamic Golden Age, from the tribal elders of Africa to the modern scientists working in DNA laboratories, humanity has never stopped searching for the answer to its own origin. This search is not merely academic. It is deeply personal, because how a person answers the question of human origin determines how they understand themselves, their purpose, their moral responsibilities, and their relationship with the universe and with Allah. In the modern era, one answer has dominated public education, media, and scientific institutions: the theory of evolution. This theory, originally proposed by Charles Darwin in 1859 in his book On the Origin of Species, argues that all life on Earth, including human beings, developed gradually over billions of years through a process of random genetic mutation and natural selection. According to this view, humans were not designed or created. They simply evolved from earlier primate ancestors, and before that from simpler organisms, and before that from single-celled life forms that emerged accidentally in a warm pool of chemicals billions of years ago. However, this theory, despite its widespread acceptance in academic institutions, is facing a growing crisis. Scientists, philosophers, anthropologists, and scholars of faith from around the world are increasingly recognizing that the evolutionary explanation for human origins is filled with massive, unresolved problems. These are not small technical problems. They are fundamental, foundational problems that strike at the very heart of the evolutionary model. And when these problems are honestly examined, what emerges is a picture that points unmistakably toward deliberate creation, toward a creator who designed human beings in full form, with full capacity, and placed them on Earth with full purpose. This document will walk through that evidence carefully, chapter by chapter, dimension by dimension. It will not use complicated scientific jargon. It will not speak only to experts. It is written for every person on Earth: the student in Bangladesh, the teacher in Nigeria, the farmer in Pakistan, the engineer in Germany, the mother in the Philippines, anyone who has ever looked up at the stars and wondered, why am I here? How did I come to be? This study will show, from every angle of human knowledge, that the answer is not chance, not evolution, not accident, but design. The design of Allah, the most wise, the most knowing, the most powerful. Section 2. Scientific anomalies, where evolution breaks down. Science is the search for truth through observation, experimentation, and logical reasoning. A good scientific theory must be able to explain the evidence, make accurate predictions, and be open to revision when the evidence does not support it. The theory of evolution, when held up against these standards, reveals a number of serious and unresolved anomalies, problems that the theory cannot explain, and that its supporters often avoid discussing in public. These anomalies are not invented by religious critics. They are recognized by serious scientists, biologists, and researchers within the scientific community itself. The Cambrian explosion, life appearing all at once. One of the most dramatic and unexplained events in the entire fossil record is what scientists call the Cambrian explosion. Approximately 530 million years ago, according to the geological timescale, a massive variety of complex animal body plans appeared in the fossil record suddenly, in what is, geologically speaking, the blink of an eye. Before this period, the fossil record shows mostly simple, single-celled organisms or soft-bodied creatures. Then, within a geologically brief window of perhaps 5 to 10 million years, dozens of completely different animal body types appear, fully formed, fully complex, with eyes, nervous systems, digestive systems, and limbs. This is a catastrophic problem for evolution. Darwin himself acknowledged it as a serious difficulty. The theory of evolution requires that complex life forms develop slowly and gradually from simpler ancestors, with countless transitional forms existing at every stage. But the Cambrian explosion shows the opposite. Complex life appearing suddenly, without identifiable ancestors, without transitional steps. Stephen Jay Gould, one of the most prominent evolutionary biologists of the 20th century, described the Cambrian explosion as a genuine challenge to the gradualism that Darwin's theory requires. More than a century and a half after Darwin, this problem remains unsolved. What does the Cambrian explosion suggest? It suggests that complex life did not gradually evolve from simpler forms. It suggests instead that multiple complex body plans were introduced suddenly, a pattern far more consistent with deliberate creation than with slow, random evolution. When life appears fully formed and complex, without precursors, the most reasonable explanation is that it was designed fully formed and complex by a creator who does not need millions of years to bring forth life. The problem of irreversibility in evolution. Another major scientific anomaly involves the concept of irreversibility. Evolution is supposed to be an undirected process. It has no goal, no direction, no purpose. It simply responds to environmental pressures through random mutation and selection. Yet when scientists study the development of complex biological structures such as the human eye, the wing of a bird, or the blood clotting mechanism of mammals, they find a striking pattern. These structures, once evolved, are essentially irreversible. The components are so interdependent that removing any single piece causes the entire system to collapse. This irreversibility is a major problem for evolutionary theory because it means these structures could not have developed step by step. Each step would have to be functional and beneficial on its own. Otherwise, natural selection would eliminate it before it could contribute to the final structure. But many biological structures are only useful when all their parts are present simultaneously. This is the problem of irreducible complexity, which will be explored in greater detail in a later section. The point here is that this pattern of irreversibility found everywhere in biology is not what an undirected evolutionary process would be expected to produce, but it is exactly what one would expect from an intelligent designer who planned the entire structure from the beginning. The statistical impossibility of random protein formation, perhaps the most devastating scientific challenge to the evolutionary explanation of life, is the mathematics of probability. Life, at its most basic level, depends on proteins. Proteins are complex molecules made up of chains of amino acids arranged in very specific sequences. A single functional protein might contain hundreds or thousands of amino acids, and for the protein to work, these amino acids must be arranged in precisely the right order. Mathematicians and biologists have calculated the probability of a single functional protein forming by random chance. The numbers are staggering. Mathematician David Berlinski and biologist Douglas Axe, among others, have calculated that the probability of a single, short functional protein of about 150 amino acids forming by random chance is approximately 1 in 10 to the power of 77, a number so large that it exceeds the total number of atoms in the observable universe. And a living cell requires not one protein, but thousands of different proteins, all working together in precise coordination. The probability of all these proteins forming randomly, at the same time, in the same place, and assembling themselves into a functioning cell is so astronomically small that it is, for all practical purposes, mathematically impossible. No credible scientist disputes the mathematics. What they dispute is the conclusion, because the conclusion points directly toward intelligent design. When the mathematics of chance eliminates random origin, what remains is purposeful creation, the fine-tuning of the universe. Science has also revealed that the universe itself is calibrated with breathtaking precision to allow life to exist. This is known as the fine-tuning problem. Physicists have discovered that the fundamental constants of the universe, such as the gravitational constant, the speed of light, the charge of an electron, the ratio of electromagnetic force to gravitational force, and dozens of others are set to extraordinarily precise values. If any of these constants were even slightly different by even 1 part in a trillion, the universe would be inhospitable to any form of life. For example, if the gravitational constant were slightly stronger, stars would burn out too quickly to allow life to develop on nearby planets. If it were slightly weaker, matter would not clump together to form stars and planets at all. If the ratio of the mass of the electron to the mass of the proton were different by even a tiny fraction, chemistry as we know it would be impossible, and life could not exist. Physicist Paul Davies, a non-religious scientist, has written extensively about this fine-tuning and acknowledged that it is one of the most profound mysteries facing modern science. The universe appears to have been precisely configured to allow human life, and this configuration cannot be explained by random chance or by evolution. Section 3. The origin of life problem where evolution cannot even begin. It is important to understand that the theory of evolution does not actually explain the origin of life. Darwin's theory begins with the assumption that life already exists. It attempts to explain how life changes over time. But it does not and cannot explain how non-living chemicals became living organisms in the first place. This is called the abiogenesis problem, and it is one of the most profound unsolved problems in all of science. For life to begin from non-living chemicals, at minimum, the following things would need to happen simultaneously, and by chance, a cell membrane would need to form to contain the chemistry of life. DNA, or a similar molecule, would need to form to carry genetic information. RNA would need to form to translate that genetic information into proteins. Proteins would need to form to carry out the functions of life. And all of these components would need to be present at the same time. in the same place, in precise functional relationships with one another. Not one of these components has ever been created from scratch in a laboratory starting from purely random chemical conditions. Scientists can manipulate experiments heavily, selecting specific chemicals, controlling temperatures, excluding harmful molecules, and still cannot create even the simplest form of life. The famous Miller-Urey experiment of 1953 is often cited as evidence that life could have arisen from chemicals. In that experiment, scientists passed electrical sparks through a mixture of gases and produced some amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. But this experiment has been fundamentally misunderstood in popular culture. Producing amino acids is enormously far from producing life. It would be like saying that because you can produce bricks by firing clay, you have explained how a cathedral built itself. Amino acids are to life what bricks are to a cathedral, raw materials that without intelligent assembly will never spontaneously become a living organism. After more than 70 years of intensive research by thousands of scientists with the most advanced technology in the world, no one has been able to produce life from non-living chemicals without intelligent guidance. This is not a small failure. This is a total, comprehensive failure of the materialistic account of life's origin, and it points with great clarity to the only remaining explanation. Life was brought into existence by an intelligent creator, by Allah, who has the power to create from nothing and to bring forth life from what has no life. Section 4. The fossil record: missing links that remain missing. If evolution were true, if human beings and all other complex life forms developed gradually from simpler ancestors over millions of years, then the fossil record should be filled with transitional forms. Every evolutionary step should leave a fossil behind. We should be able to trace an unbroken chain of fossils from the simplest organisms to the most complex, with smooth, gradual changes visible at every stage. But this is not what the fossil record shows. Charles Darwin himself was deeply troubled by the fossil record. In his own words, he acknowledged that the absence of transitional fossils was the most obvious and gravest objection to his theory. He hoped that future fossil discoveries would fill in the gaps. More than 160 years later, after enormous investments in fossil hunting on every continent, those gaps remain. The missing links are still missing. The missing human ancestors. In the specific case of human evolution, the fossil record is particularly problematic. The popular picture of human evolution, a progression of creatures gradually becoming more upright and more human-looking, is a dramatic oversimplification that does not reflect the actual evidence. The fossils that have been proposed as human ancestors are few in number, often fragmentary, consisting of just a few bone fragments, and their interpretation is hotly contested among paleoanthropologists themselves. Many famous ape-man fossils have been reclassified or debunked over the decades. Piltdown Man, once celebrated as the missing link between humans and apes, was exposed as a deliberate fraud in 1953. A human skull, combined with the jaw of an orangutan, Nebraska Man, used as evidence of human evolution in a famous legal trial, turned out to be based on a single tooth that was later found to belong to a pig. Neanderthals, long depicted as primitive brutish creatures, are now known to have had large brains, larger than modern humans in some cases. Created art, buried their dead, and cared for their sick and elderly. Behaviors that indicate a fully human level of intelligence and social organization. The honest conclusion from the fossil evidence is that human beings appear in the fossil record as human beings, not as transitional creatures halfway between apes and modern humans. This is exactly what one would expect if human beings were created in full form by Allah, rather than gradually evolved from animal ancestors. Sudden appearance as a pattern. When scientists examine the fossil record honestly and comprehensively, one pattern emerges with remarkable consistency. Most animal groups appear suddenly in the fossil record, fully formed, without clear ancestors. This pattern is not limited to the Cambrian explosion. It appears throughout the fossil record, at multiple points in geological history. Fish appear suddenly. Birds appear suddenly. Flowering plants appear suddenly. Mammals appear suddenly. And human beings appear suddenly. This pattern of sudden appearance is the opposite of what the gradual process of evolution predicts. But it is perfectly consistent with creation. When Allah creates a species, He creates it complete and functional, not as a half-formed intermediate waiting for millions of years of random mutations to make it viable. The fossil record, far from being the great evidence for evolution that it is often claimed to be, is actually one of the strongest lines of evidence against it. Section 5. Intelligent design arguments, the signature of a creator. Intelligent design is a scientific and philosophical framework that argues that certain features of living organisms and the universe are best explained by an intelligent cause rather than by an undirected process such as natural selection. It is important to note that intelligent design is not simply a religious argument. It is based on the same kind of reasoning that scientists use every day when they try to distinguish between natural processes and intelligent causes. For example, when archaeologists find a stone shaped into an arrowhead, they do not conclude that random wind and water erosion shaped it that way. They recognize the design, the precise angles, the functional shape, the evidence of intentional manufacture, and they correctly conclude that an intelligent being made it. Intelligent design applies this same reasoning to the biological world, and the argument is enormously powerful. Specified complexity, the signature of intelligence, mathematician, and philosopher. William Dembski has developed a rigorous concept called specified complexity to describe the kind of information patterns that reliably indicate intelligent design. Specified complexity occurs when a pattern is both highly unlikely complex and matches an independently recognizable pattern specified. Random events can produce complexity. A series of randomly thrown dice will produce a complex sequence of numbers. And patterns can be simple. A long series of the same number is a pattern, but it is not complex. But when something is both highly improbable and matches a specific, independently recognizable pattern, like the letters of a meaningful sentence in a book, then intelligent design is the only reasonable explanation. DNA, the molecule that carries the genetic information of all living organisms, is the ultimate example of specified complexity. It carries information in a 4-letter chemical code, and this information is not just complex, it is specified. It encodes precise instructions for building specific proteins, assembling them in the right order, regulating when genes are turned on and off, and coordinating the development of an entire organism from a single cell. This kind of specified complexity has never been observed arising from purely natural, undirected processes. In every known case in human experience, specified complexity is produced by intelligent minds. The conclusion that follows is straightforward. DNA was produced by an intelligent mind, the mind of Allah. The anthropic principle, the universe built for humans. The anthropic principle is the observation that the universe appears to be fine-tuned specifically to allow human life to exist, as discussed in the section on scientific anomalies. The fundamental constants of physics are calibrated with extraordinary precision for life. But there is a deeper layer to this observation that goes beyond physics. The Earth itself appears to be uniquely positioned and configured to support human life, and not just to support it, but to support it in a way that allows humans to do science, to observe the universe, to ask questions about their origin, and to seek their creator. Astrophysicist Guillermo Gonzalez and philosopher J. Richards documented in their book, The Privileged Planet, that the Earth occupies a remarkably favorable position in the universe for both supporting complex life and for allowing scientific discovery. The Earth is in the right region of the right kind of galaxy, orbiting the right kind of star, at the right distance, with the right kind of moon, the right axial tilt, the right atmospheric composition, and the right geological activity. The probability of all these factors coinciding by chance is vanishingly small. The most reasonable explanation is that the Earth was prepared as a home for human beings, a preparation that required intentional design by a creator of unlimited power and wisdom. Section 6. The irreducible complexity of the human body. Biochemist Michael Behalf introduced the concept of irreducible complexity in his landmark book, Darwin's Black Box, published in 1996. An irreducibly complex system is one that consists of several well-matched interacting parts that each contribute to the basic function of the system, and where the removal of any one part causes the system to cease functioning completely. Bay argued that such systems cannot have evolved gradually, because a partially assembled, irreducibly complex system would have no function, and therefore no survival advantage, until all its parts were in place simultaneously. A simple illustration of irreducible complexity is a mechanical mousetrap. A mousetrap requires at minimum 5 parts: a base, a spring, a hammer, a catch, and a holding bar. If you remove any single part, the mousetrap does not function at all. It cannot catch mice with 4 parts. It cannot catch mice with 3 parts. It is either fully functional with all 5 parts, or it is completely non-functional. A mousetrap cannot have evolved gradually, part by part, because no intermediate stage would have any function. The same principle applies with far greater force to biological systems. The bacterial flagellum, one of the most celebrated examples of irreducible complexity in biology, is the bacterial flagellum, the whip-like tail that some bacteria use to swim through liquid environments. The bacterial flagellum is an astonishingly sophisticated molecular machine. It consists of approximately 40 different protein components, including a rotor, a stator, a drive shaft, a universal joint, a hook, and a propeller, all assembled with extraordinary precision, and all working together to rotate the flagellum at speeds of up to 100,000 revolutions per minute. If any one of these 40 protein components is removed or altered, the flagellum ceases to function entirely. The components do not have independent functions that could be selected for individually by natural selection. They are meaningful only as parts of the complete, assembled flagellum. The probability of all 40 components arising simultaneously by random mutation is essentially zero, and without all 40 components, there is nothing for natural selection to preserve. The bacterial flagellum is a system that demands a designer and intelligence that conceived the complete design and assembled all its parts at once. The human blood clotting system. The human blood clotting system is another textbook example of irreducible complexity. When a blood vessel is damaged, a cascade of biochemical reactions is triggered that results in the formation of a blood clot to seal the wound. This cascade involves more than 20 different proteins, each of which must be present and functional for the system to work. If any one of these proteins is absent or defective, as in the case of hemophilia, the clotting system fails, and even a minor wound can be fatal. The blood clotting cascade also has built-in mechanisms to prevent it from overactivating and clotting the blood in undamaged vessels, which would be equally fatal. This exquisitely balanced system, with its multiple precisely interacting components and its sophisticated self-regulation, could not have assembled itself gradually. Each step of the cascade is only useful in the context of the complete cascade. This system bears all the hallmarks of deliberate, intelligent design, the design of a creator who understood the requirements of a living circulatory system from the beginning. The human eye, a window of wonder. Darwin himself acknowledged that the evolution of the eye seemed, at first glance, absurd. The human eye is a marvel of biological engineering. It contains a lens that automatically adjusts its focus, an iris that regulates the amount of light entering, a retina that converts light into electrical signals with astonishing sensitivity and resolution, and a neural processing system that interprets those signals into the rich, full-color, three-dimensional visual experience that human beings enjoy. The retina alone contains approximately 125 million photoreceptor cells, each capable of detecting individual photons of light. The eye also has a remarkable ability to adapt to a range of light intensities, spanning 10 orders of magnitude from the faintest starlight to direct sunlight. All of these components must work together simultaneously and with extraordinary precision for vision to be possible. The gradual evolution of such a system, where every intermediate stage would need to be functional and beneficial, faces enormous explanatory challenges. The human eye speaks eloquently of a master designer who understands optics, neuroscience, and the needs of the creature he is creating. Section 7. The Information Crisis, DNA, as a Divine Language. Perhaps the single most powerful argument against random evolutionary origin and for intelligent design is the information content of DNA. DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, is the molecule that stores the genetic blueprint of every living organism on Earth. It is found in the nucleus of almost every cell in the human body, and it carries the complete instructions for building, operating, and reproducing that organism. The amount of information stored in the DNA of a single human cell is staggering. It is estimated that the human genome contains approximately 3 billion base pairs of chemical code, carrying enough information to fill several thousand books of 500 pages each. But it is not merely the quantity of information in DNA that is remarkable, it is the nature of that information. DNA is not a random sequence of chemicals. It is a highly organized, functional code, analogous to a computer program or to a written language. It has syntax, grammar, and meaning. Geneticist Francis Collins, who led the Human Genome Project, described the human genome as the language in which Allah spoke life into being. The information in DNA specifies the exact sequence of amino acids in every protein the body produces, the timing and regulation of gene expression, the development of the embryo from a single fertilized cell, and the unique characteristics of every individual human being. The crucial question is, where does information come from? In every known case in human experience, without a single exception, information is produced by intelligent minds. No one has ever observed information arising from purely random, undirected physical processes. A book does not write itself. A computer program does not code itself. A message does not compose itself. Information always and only arises from intelligence. DNA is information vastly more complex and more precisely organized than any information system that human beings have ever created. The only conclusion consistent with all known experience is that DNA was authored by an intelligence of incomprehensible power and wisdom, by Allah, the creator of all things. The DNA of a single human cell, if uncoiled and stretched out, would be approximately 2 meters long. Every cell in the human body contains this complete blueprint. The human body contains approximately 37 trillion cells. The total amount of DNA in a single human body, if stretched end to end, would reach from the earth to the sun and back more than 600 times. This is the library that Allah wrote into the fabric of every human being. Section 8. Anthropological Arguments. The Uniqueness of Humanity. Anthropology is the study of human beings, their physical characteristics, their cultures, their societies, their languages, and their behavior. When anthropologists examine humanity across cultures and across history, they find a set of characteristics that are unique to human beings and that cannot be explained by evolutionary theory. These characteristics point to a fundamentally different kind of being, one that was not produced by the same process that produced other animals, but was created with distinct qualities that set it apart from all other living creatures. Language, the uniquely human gift. Every known human society, without exception, has language. Language is not merely a communication system. Animals communicate too. What makes human language unique is its generative grammar, the ability to combine a finite set of words and grammatical rules to produce an infinite variety of novel sentences expressing complex, abstract thoughts. Human beings can speak about things that are not present, events that happened in the past, possibilities that have never occurred, hypothetical scenarios, mathematical relationships, moral principles, and spiritual realities. No other animal possesses this capacity. Linguist Noam Chomsky has argued that human language ability is so radically different from animal communication that it cannot have evolved gradually from animal systems. There is no intermediate form between animal communication and human language in the fossil record or among living species. Human language appears to be a unique, discontinuous capacity, as if it were switched on all at once, rather than gradually developed. This is what one would expect if human beings were created in full form, already equipped with the capacity for rich, complex language. As the Quran describes, when Allah taught Adam the names of all things, art, music, and aesthetic sense, every known human culture, without exception, creates art and music. The oldest known examples of human art, cave paintings found in France, Spain, Indonesia, and Australia, are estimated to be tens of thousands of years old. And these early examples are not crude scrawlings. They show sophisticated artistic technique, a sense of proportion and perspective, and an evident intention to represent the beauty of the living world. This universal human impulse to create beauty is deeply mysterious from an evolutionary standpoint, because it confers no obvious survival advantage. Why would natural selection favor the ability to appreciate a sunset, to be moved by music, to create sculptures of animals, or to write poetry? These activities do not help an organism find food, escape predators, or reproduce more successfully. Yet they are universal among human beings and apparently absent in all other species. The simplest explanation is that human beings were created with an aesthetic sense, a capacity to perceive and create beauty, because they were made in the image of a creator who is himself the source of all beauty. This capacity was given to them as a gift, not developed through random mutation. Moral consciousness, the universal sense of right and wrong. Every known human society, without exception, has a moral code. Every human culture distinguishes between actions that are right and actions that are wrong, between behaviors that are acceptable and behaviors that are condemned. The specific content of these moral codes varies between cultures, but the existence of moral reasoning itself is universal, and at the deepest level there are moral intuitions that appear across virtually all human cultures. The wrongness of murder, the importance of caring for children, the value of honesty, the obligation to treat others with a basic degree of fairness. Where does this universal moral sense come from? Evolution can explain behaviors that increase reproductive success. It cannot explain a genuine sense of moral obligation, the feeling that some actions are truly right or truly wrong, regardless of their consequences for the individual. An animal that kills its competitor is not immoral, it is simply following its instincts. But a human being who harms an innocent person knows, at a deep level, that they have done something that violates a moral law that exists independently of their desires. This universal moral consciousness, this sense of ought, is what philosophers call the moral law. It is not a product of evolution. It is the echo of Allah's guidance, written into the human heart. The universal search for Allah. Perhaps the most profound anthropological fact about human beings is this: every known human civilization in history has worshipped a higher power. From the ancient Egyptians and Mesopotamians to the indigenous peoples of the Americas and Australia, from the civilizations of India and China to the monotheistic traditions of the Middle East. The impulse to acknowledge worship and seek a relationship with a transcendent creator is universal to the human species. Even in modern secular societies, where formal religious practice has declined, surveys consistently show that the vast majority of human beings believe in some form of higher power or spiritual reality. This universal religious impulse is deeply puzzling from an evolutionary standpoint. Why would natural selection produce a creature that consistently and universally believes in a non-physical realm and a creator? Some evolutionary psychologists have proposed that religion is a byproduct of other adaptive cognitive tendencies. But this is speculation, not evidence. And it does not explain why the content of religious belief so consistently points toward a creator who is all-powerful, all-knowing, and morally good. The simplest and most coherent explanation for the universal human impulse to worship is that human beings were created by Allah and were designed with an innate recognition of their creator, what theologians call the fitra in Islamic thought, the natural disposition toward the divine that is built into every human being from birth. Section 9. The mystery of human consciousness, the hardest problem in science. Consciousness is the most mysterious phenomenon in the known universe. It is the fact of subjective experience, the experience of what it is like to see the color red, to feel pain, to hear music, to feel joy or grief or wonder. Scientists and philosophers call this qualia, the felt quality of experience, and it remains, after centuries of philosophical inquiry and decades of neuroscience research, completely inexplicable in terms of physical processes. The hard problem of consciousness, as philosopher David Chalmers named it, is this: why do physical processes in the brain produce subjective experience at all? We can describe in enormous detail the neural processes that occur when a person sees a red flower, the photons of light, the stimulation of retinal cells, the signals traveling along the optic nerve, the patterns of neural firing in the visual cortex. But none of this description tells us why there is any subjective experience accompanying these physical processes. Why isn't the brain just a dark, unconscious information processing machine with no inner experience at all? Why is there something it is like to be a human being? Materialistic science, the science that says everything can be explained in terms of matter and energy, has no answer to this question. Consciousness simply does not fit into the materialistic picture of the world. It is not reducible to chemistry or physics. It cannot be observed from the outside or measured with instruments. It is, by its very nature, a first-person phenomenon, accessible only from the inside. The existence of consciousness is one of the most powerful arguments for the existence of a non-physical dimension of reality, for the existence of a soul, and for the existence of Allah, who created that soul. Moreover, human consciousness has properties that go far beyond anything that could plausibly be explained by natural selection. Human beings can contemplate mathematical truths that have no practical application. They can reflect on their own existence and question its meaning. They can feel genuine compassion for strangers on the other side of the world. They can sacrifice their own survival for abstract principles of justice. They can experience wonder at the beauty of the universe. They can seek and find a relationship with their Creator. These capacities of human consciousness are not survival tools. They are the signature of a being created for a higher purpose, created in full form, with full consciousness, to know and serve Allah. Section 10. Philosophical Arguments, Purpose, Reason, and Design. Philosophy is the discipline that asks the deepest questions about reality. What exists? How do we know what we know? What is right and wrong? What is the meaning and purpose of human existence? When these questions are applied to the question of human origin, philosophy provides some of the most powerful arguments for creation over evolution. The cosmological argument, everything has a cause. One of the oldest and most enduring philosophical arguments for the existence of Allah and for the deliberate creation of human beings is the cosmological argument. In its simplest form, the argument goes as follows. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, as modern science confirms through the Big Bang Theory. Therefore, the universe has a cause. And since the universe includes all of space, time, matter, and energy, the cause of the universe must itself be outside of space, time, matter, and energy. It must be immaterial, eternal, and of incomprehensible power. It must be a creator. This argument, developed by medieval Islamic philosophers including Ibn Sina and later by Thomas Aquinas, has withstood centuries of philosophical scrutiny. The most common modern objection, if everything has a cause, what caused Allah, rests on a misunderstanding. The argument is not that everything has a cause. The argument is that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Allah, by definition, does not begin to exist. He is eternal, without beginning or end. The universe, however, did begin to exist, and it therefore requires a cause that transcends it. Human beings, as part of the universe, are part of what was brought into existence by this eternal, transcendent creator. The teleological argument, the argument from design. The teleological argument from the Greek word telos, meaning purpose or end, argues that the evidence of design and purpose in the universe and in living organisms points to a designer. The classic formulation by philosopher William Paley used the analogy of a watch. If you find a watch lying on the ground, you recognize that it was designed and made by a watchmaker because its components are arranged in a precise way that achieves a specific purpose. The components of a watch could not have assembled themselves by chance. By analogy, the far more complex and precisely arranged components of living organisms and of the universe itself demand the conclusion that they were designed by an intelligent creator. Modern science has dramatically strengthened the teleological argument beyond what Paley could have imagined. Paley knew nothing of DNA, nothing of the bacterial flagellum, nothing of the fine-tuning of the cosmological constants, nothing of the irreducible complexity of biochemical systems. With everything that science has discovered in the past century and a half, the evidence of design in nature has grown immeasurably. The more we understand about how living organisms work at the molecular level, the more clearly we see the signature of a master designer, Allah, the wise, the all-knowing. The argument from reason: can evolution explain rationality? One of the most philosophically devastating arguments against the evolutionary account of human origin was made by C.S. Lewis, the Oxford literary scholar and philosopher. In his book Miracles, Lewis argued as follows: if our cognitive faculties, our reasoning abilities, were produced by an unguided evolutionary process, then we have no reason to trust them to produce true beliefs. Natural selection would have favored cognitive faculties that helped our ancestors survive and reproduce. But survival value and truth value are not the same thing. A cognitive system that produces systematically false beliefs could still aid survival, if those false beliefs happen to lead to adaptive behavior. In other words, if evolution produced our reasoning abilities, then our reasoning abilities might be unreliable guides to truth, including our reasoning about evolution itself. Philosopher Alvin Plantinga has developed this argument into a rigorous formal proof, known as the evolutionary argument against naturalism. The conclusion is striking. If naturalistic evolution is true, we cannot trust our own reasoning. But if we cannot trust our own reasoning, we cannot trust the reasoning that supports evolutionary theory. The theory undermines itself. The only way to escape this self-defeating conclusion is to acknowledge that human rational faculties were designed by a creator who intended them to reliably track truth. Section 11. Logical arguments. What pure reason demands. Logic is the science of valid reasoning. It operates independently of religious faith and of scientific observation. It examines the structure of arguments to determine whether conclusions follow necessarily from premises. When logical analysis is applied to the question of human origin, it produces results that are deeply unfavorable to the evolutionary account and strongly supportive of creation. The argument from improbability. Logic demands that when we seek to explain any observed phenomenon, we must choose the explanation that is most consistent with all the available evidence, and we must not invoke explanations that are so improbable as to be effectively impossible. The evolutionary account of human origins requires us to accept a series of events that are each individually a vanishingly small probability, and the joint probability of all of them occurring together is so small that it cannot even be meaningfully expressed as a number. Consider the sequential improbabilities required by the evolutionary account. The universe must arise from nothing by chance. The physical constants of the universe must be calibrated by chance to allow life. The Earth must be positioned and configured by chance to support complex life. The first living cell must form by chance from non-living chemicals. This cell must by chance develop the ability to reproduce. This reproducing cell must by chance develop a genetic code. This genetic code must by chance produce increasingly complex organisms over billions of years through random mutation. These mutations must by chance eventually produce a creature with a human body, human brain, human consciousness, human language, human moral sense, and human spiritual awareness. Logic demands that when a sequence of improbabilities becomes sufficiently extreme, the hypothesis of chance must be abandoned in favor of the hypothesis of design. The law of cause and effect. One of the most fundamental principles of logic and of science is the law of cause and effect. Every effect has a cause, and the cause must be adequate to produce the effect. A small match cannot cause a massive explosion. A simple computer program cannot produce the Mona Lisa, and random unguided chemical processes cannot produce the astonishing complexity, order, and purposefulness of living organisms, and certainly cannot produce the consciousness, rationality, moral sense, and spiritual awareness of human beings. The cause must be adequate to the effect. If the effect is a human being, a being of consciousness, reason, language, art, morality, spirituality, and infinite curiosity about the universe, then the cause must be a being of intelligence, wisdom, power, and creative capacity that exceeds human understanding. That cause is Allah, the Creator, whose knowledge encompasses all things, whose power is without limit, and whose wisdom is reflected in every atom of the creation he has brought into being. The principle of sufficient reason. Philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz formulated the principle of sufficient reason. Nothing exists without a sufficient reason for its existence. Every fact about the world demands an explanation. The existence of human beings, with all our extraordinary complexity and all our unique capacities, demands an explanation. The evolutionary account says the explanation is random mutation and natural selection over billions of years. But as we have seen, this explanation is mathematically insufficient. The probabilities are too small. Empirically insufficient, the fossil record does not support it. And logically insufficient, it cannot explain consciousness, reason, or moral sense. The only explanation that is truly sufficient, that is truly adequate to explain the full reality of what human beings are, is that they were created, in full form, by Allah. Section 12. Analogical arguments. Seeing truth through comparison. Analogical reasoning is one of the most powerful and universally accessible forms of human thinking. It works by identifying a similarity between two situations or objects, and using that similarity to draw conclusions about the less familiar one from the more familiar one. Analogies are not proofs in the strict logical sense, but they can be tremendously illuminating. They can make abstract truths visible and concrete. Here are several powerful analogies that illuminate the case for human creation in full form. The library analogy. Imagine that an explorer discovers an ancient library in the middle of a remote desert. The library contains thousands of books, written in multiple languages, each dealing with different subjects: mathematics, history, philosophy, medicine, poetry, and music. The books are organized on shelves according to subject, and there is a detailed catalog that cross-references them. Would any rational explorer conclude that this library assembled itself? That the desert wind randomly arranged atoms of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen into letters, words, sentences, paragraphs, chapters, and books, all carrying meaningful, organized, coherent information. Of course not. The library is obviously the product of intelligence, of writers, editors, architects, and librarians who created it with purpose and care. Now consider, the DNA in a single human cell contains more information than the entire library just described. It is written in a 4-letter chemical code, with a syntax more complex than any human language, carrying instructions more intricate than the most sophisticated engineering blueprint ever written. If the desert library demands an intelligent creator, how infinitely more does the library of DNA written into every cell of the human body demand the creative intelligence of Allah? The city analogy. Imagine looking down at a great city from the air, a city of millions of people, with roads and highways connecting neighborhoods, power lines carrying electricity, water pipes distributing fresh water, sewage systems removing waste, buildings of every size and function, hospitals, schools, markets, parks, and government centers. Would any reasonable observer conclude that this city assembled itself from raw materials through random physical processes? Obviously not. A city, with all its organized complexity and all its purposeful design, demands an intelligent creator, urban planners, architects, engineers, workers, and leaders who planned and built it deliberately. The human body is a city of cells, approximately 37 trillion cells, each one a living factory of incomprehensible complexity. These cells are organized into tissues, which are organized into organs, which are organized into systems, which work together in perfect coordination to sustain life. The city of cells has its own power generation system, metabolism, its own communication network, the nervous system and hormonal system, its own defense forces, the immune system, its own waste management system, kidneys, liver, lungs, its own reproduction system, and its own repair mechanisms. If a city demands intelligent planners, the human body, infinitely more complex than any city ever built, demands a planner of infinite intelligence and power. Allah the book analogy. No one has ever found a book that wrote itself. No one has ever discovered a meaningful, complex, organized text, a novel, a scientific paper, a legal document, a religious scripture that assembled itself from random arrangements of letters without an author. The more meaningful, complex, and organized a text is, the more certainly we know that an intelligent author created it. This is not a philosophical principle. It is a universal, empirical observation confirmed by every piece of written text that has ever existed. The genetic code in DNA is a text, a biological text of staggering length and complexity, carrying meaningful information in every sequence of bases. The fact that DNA uses a code, a system of symbols that represent something other than themselves, just as the letters of this sentence represent sounds and meanings, is itself a profound indicator of intelligence. Codes are always invented by intelligent minds. The genetic code, which translates sequences of DNA bases into sequences of amino acids and proteins, is a specific, arbitrary, and universal code, and it unmistakably bears the signature of the divine intelligence that authored it. The watch and the watchmaker. William Paley's famous analogy, finding a watch and recognizing that it had a watchmaker, was dismissed by Darwin and his followers, but modern biology has given it new and overwhelming force. If a simple mechanical watch, with its handful of precisely interacting components, demands the conclusion of an intelligent designer, what does the bacterial flagellum demand, with its 40 precisely interacting protein components assembled in a specific sequence performing a specific function? What does the human immune system demand, with its ability to recognize billions of different foreign molecules, produce customized antibodies against each one, and remember every encounter for future defense? What does the human brain demand, with its 86 billion neurons, connected by approximately 100 trillion synaptic connections, capable of learning, remembering, reasoning, creating, loving, and praying? Paley's watch analogy was not wrong, it was simply understated. The biological world does not just contain a watch. It contains watches within watches within watches, all nested inside each other in hierarchies of complexity that dwarf any human engineering achievement. Every level of this nested complexity demands the conclusion of intelligent design. Every level proclaims the power, wisdom, and artistry of Allah. Section 13. Spiritual intelligence, the inner compass of the human being. In recent decades, psychologists and researchers have expanded our understanding of human intelligence beyond the traditional IQ model. Howard Gardner proposed multiple intelligences: linguistic, logical, mathematical, spatial, musical, bodily-kinesthetic, interpersonal, and naturalistic. Dana Zohar and Ian Marshall, in their book SQ, Spiritual Intelligence, the Ultimate Intelligence, proposed a ninth form of intelligence. Spiritual intelligence, SQ, the intelligence with which we address and solve problems of meaning and value. Spiritual intelligence is the capacity to ask the deepest questions about life. Why am I here? What is the meaning of suffering? What happens after death? Is there a creator? And to orient one's life in accordance with the answers. Research consistently shows that human beings possess this capacity universally. In every culture, in every era of history, human beings ask these questions and seek these answers. This is not merely a cognitive habit or a cultural tradition, it appears to be a deep feature of human nature, as fundamental as the capacity for language or moral reasoning. The existence of spiritual intelligence is deeply significant for the question of human origin. Why would an unguided evolutionary process produce a creature that asks questions about the meaning of existence, the nature of the soul, and the reality of Allah? These questions have no survival value. A creature that spent its time pondering the nature of consciousness and the attributes of the Creator would be at a competitive disadvantage compared to a creature that focused entirely on finding food and avoiding predators. Yet human beings everywhere and always have devoted enormous time and energy to spiritual inquiry. The most coherent explanation is that spiritual intelligence was not an accident of evolution. It was placed in human beings by their Creator, as part of their design, as the faculty by which they can know Him, seek Him, and fulfill the purpose for which He created them. Spiritual intelligence is the compass that points toward Allah. It was given to human beings in full form. From the beginning, not developed gradually over millions of years, but present from the moment the first human being drew breath. Section 14. Islamic Spirituality and the Origin of Man. Islam offers one of the most complete, coherent, and spiritually rich accounts of human origin in the history of human thought. The Islamic account of creation is not merely a religious story, it is a profound description of the nature of reality, the nature of the human being, and the relationship between the created and the Creator. It addresses questions that science cannot answer, and that philosophy approaches only tentatively, with a clarity and authority that comes from divine revelation. According to the Islamic account, human beings were not the product of a long, accidental process of biological evolution. They were created deliberately, purposefully, and in full form, by Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. The creation of the first human being, Adam, was a direct act of divine creation. Allah formed him with His own hands from clay, breathed His Spirit into him and gave him consciousness, intelligence, language, moral awareness, and the capacity for spiritual knowledge. This was not a gradual process, it was an immediate, complete, and perfect act of creation. The concept of fitra, the divine nature within, one of the most important concepts in Islamic spirituality regarding human nature, is the fitra, the innate, original disposition with which every human being is born. The fitra is the natural state of the human soul, as Allah created it, a state of purity, of recognition, of truth, of inclination toward goodness and beauty, and of an innate awareness of the Creator. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught that every human being is born in a state of fitra, in a state of natural alignment with the truth of Allah's existence, and of Islam. The concept of fitra explains many of the anthropological observations discussed earlier in this study. The universality of religious belief, the universal moral sense, the universal impulse toward beauty and art, the universal capacity for spiritual experience. All of these are expressions of the fitra. They are not evolutionary accidents. They are features of the original, complete human nature that Allah designed and breathed into Adam, and that has been passed on to every human being since. The fitra is evidence that human beings were created in full form, with a fully developed spiritual and moral nature from the very beginning. The ruhu, the divine breath. Islamic spirituality teaches that the human being is not merely a physical organism. The human being is a composite of two dimensions: the physical body, created from the earth, and the soul, ruhu, breathed directly into the human being by Allah. The Quran states that when Allah created Adam, He formed him from clay and then breathed His Spirit into him. This breathing of the divine Spirit is what transformed a physical form into a living, conscious, moral, and spiritual being. The ruhu, the soul, is not a product of biological evolution. It is not a function of the brain or of any other physical organ. It is a direct gift from Allah, a light from the divine light, a breath from the divine breath. It is what gives human beings their consciousness, their moral sense, their capacity for spiritual experience, their hunger for truth and beauty and justice, and their innate awareness of their Creator. The soul cannot be explained by chemistry or biology. It cannot be measured by any instrument. It is the most real thing about a human being, and it is evidence that human beings are not the product of a material process, but of a direct, spiritual act of divine creation. The imana, the trust carried by humans. The Quran describes a magnificent concept known as the imana, the trust, or responsibility, that was offered to the heavens, the earth, and the mountains, and that all of them refused to bear. The human being alone accepted this trust. The imana is generally understood by Islamic scholars to refer to the moral responsibility, the freedom of choice between good and evil, the capacity for moral reasoning, and the accountability before Allah for one's choices and actions. This concept is profoundly relevant to the question of human origin. The imana could not have been offered to a creature that was still in the process of evolving, still half animal, still guided primarily by instinct, still lacking the full capacity for moral reasoning and free choice. The imana was offered to a creature that was complete, fully formed in body, mind, and soul, capable of understanding the weight of the responsibility and of choosing to accept it. This is the human being as Allah created, not an incomplete evolutionary product, but a mature, complete, dignified creation, the Khalifa, the representative of Allah on earth. Section 15. Islamic intellect and the rational case for creation. Islam is unique among the world's major religious traditions in the extraordinary emphasis it places on reason, knowledge, and intellectual inquiry. The very first word revealed to the Prophet Muhammad was the command to read, to seek knowledge, to engage the intellect, to observe the world and reason about what is observed. The Quran repeatedly calls upon human beings to use their reason, to observe the signs ayat in the natural world, and to reflect upon their own existence as evidence of the Creator. The Islamic intellectual tradition has produced, across 14 centuries, some of the greatest scientists, philosophers, mathematicians, physicians, and polymaths in human history. Ibn Sina Avicenna developed the first systematic philosophy of existence. Ibn Rushd Averroes produced comprehensive commentaries on Aristotle that shaped the development of philosophy in both the Islamic world and medieval Europe. Al-Biruni conducted pioneering scientific observations that anticipated modern methods by centuries. Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, and Ibn Khaldun made foundational contributions to philosophy, sociology, and the theory of knowledge. The great Islamic universities of Baghdad, Cairo, Cordoba, and Samarkand were centers of intellectual inquiry that kept the flame of knowledge burning during Europe's dark ages. The rational argument from Islamic theology, known as Kalam, developed sophisticated rational arguments for the existence of Allah and for the deliberate creation of the universe and of human beings. The most important of these arguments is the Kalam cosmological argument, developed by medieval Islamic scholars and later made famous in the Western philosophical tradition by William Lane Craig. The argument runs as follows. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. The cause of the universe must be a being that is itself uncaused, beginningless, eternal, immaterial, enormously powerful, and the creator of space, time, matter, and energy. This is a description of Allah. Islamic scholars also developed the argument from contingency. Everything in the universe is contingent. It exists, but it might not have existed. Its existence is not self-explanatory. It depends on other things for its existence. But an infinite regress of contingent things is impossible. Therefore, there must be a necessary being, a being whose existence is self-explanatory and does not depend on anything else. This necessary being is Allah. Human beings are among the most obviously contingent of all beings. We are born, we live briefly, and we die. Our existence demands a necessary creator, who brought us into being deliberately and for a purpose. The signs of Allah in the human being. The Quran repeatedly draws attention to human beings themselves as one of the most powerful signs ayat of Allah's existence, power, and wisdom. Human beings are called upon to reflect on their own creation as evidence of the Creator. The Quran asks, was the human being created from nothing, or did they create themselves? These questions are not rhetorical flourishes, they are rational arguments. A human being who reflects honestly on the question cannot conclude that they came from nothing, and cannot conclude that they created themselves. The only remaining conclusion is that they were created by another, by Allah. When a person looks honestly at the human body, its billions of precisely interacting cells, its self-regulating systems, its capacity for consciousness and reason and love and prayer, and asks, did this arise from random chance? The only rational answer is no. The Islamic intellectual tradition has always maintained that reason, properly used, leads to recognition of Allah. The Quran calls upon human beings to travel the earth and observe the creation, to look within themselves and to conclude from what they see that there is no explanation except a creator of infinite wisdom and power. This is not blind faith, it is reason following the evidence where it leads. Section 16. The Quran and the creation of human beings. The Quran, the final, complete, and perfectly preserved revelation of Allah to humanity, provides a detailed, multi-layered account of the creation of human beings. This account is unique in the literature of world religion for its combination of theological depth, scientific accuracy far beyond what was possible for a human author in 7th century Arabia, and spiritual richness. The Quranic account of human creation is not a myth or an allegory. It is a description of historical and metaphysical reality, communicated by Allah to His Prophet for the guidance of all humanity. The Quran describes the creation of human beings in multiple places and from multiple perspectives. It describes the physical dimension of creation, the formation of the human body from clay, a reference to the elemental, earthly components of which the human body is composed. It describes the spiritual dimension, the breathing of Allah's spirit into the human form, giving it consciousness, intelligence, and spiritual capacity. It describes the cognitive dimension, Allah teaching Adam the names of all things, establishing human beings as beings of language and knowledge, and it describes the moral and relational dimension, the covenant between Allah and human beings. the offer of the amana, and the designation of human beings as Allah's representatives Khalifa on earth. Creation from clay, the physical dimension. The Quran states that Allah created the human being from clay, or more specifically, from an extract of clay, from a sticky clay, from black altered mud. These descriptions are not contradictory. They describe the same material reality from different angles. The human body is composed of elements that are found in the earth: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, calcium, phosphorus, potassium, sodium, and many others. All of these elements are literally found in clay and soil. Modern chemistry confirms that the human body is, in terms of its elemental composition, made of the same materials as the earth. But the Quran's description is not merely about chemical composition. It is making a deeper point about the nature of the human being. Human beings come from the earth. They are connected to the physical world, dependent on its food and water, and they will return to it at death. This earthly origin is part of what makes human beings humble before their Creator. They are not self-sufficient, self-created, or self-sustaining. They are created beings, dependent on Allah for their very existence at every moment. The breathing of the Spirit, the spiritual dimension. But the Quran does not stop at the description of physical creation. It describes a second dimension of human creation that is of incomparably greater significance. The breathing of Allah's Spirit, ruhu, into the human form. This is the act by which a physical body becomes a living, conscious, spiritual being. The ruhu is described in the Quran as something about which human beings have been given only a little knowledge. It is a divine mystery, a dimension of reality that exceeds human comprehension. The breathing of the divine Spirit into the human being is the source of all that makes human beings unique. Among the creatures of the earth, it is the source of consciousness, of reason, of moral awareness, of spiritual capacity, of the ability to know and love and seek Allah. Without the ruhu, the human being would be nothing more than an elaborate arrangement of chemicals, a sophisticated machine, but not a person, not a soul, not a being capable of worship, love, and knowledge of the divine. With the ruhu, the human being is elevated above all other creatures of the earth and becomes the crown of creation, the being for whom the earth was prepared and the universe was designed. Teaching Adam the names, the knowledge dimension. The Quran describes a remarkable event that followed the creation of Adam. Allah taught Adam the names of all things. This is understood by Islamic scholars to refer to the gift of language, the capacity to name, categorize, conceptualize, and communicate about the world. But it goes deeper than language alone. It refers to the gift of knowledge, the capacity to understand the world, to reason about it, to ask questions about it, and to seek understanding of its creator. This gift of knowledge was so significant that it became the basis for the angels' prostration before Adam. Allah asked the angels to inform him of the names of things, and they could not. Then he asked Adam, and Adam knew. This was Allah's demonstration that the human being he had created was not a lesser being than the angels, but a being of unique excellence, endowed with a form of knowledge and understanding that the angels did not possess. The human being was created in full form with a fully developed cognitive capacity, not as a primitive creature that would spend millions of years gradually developing intelligence, but as a complete being of knowledge and understanding from the very first moment of existence. Section 17. The soul, a dimension beyond biology. The concept of the soul, of a non-physical dimension of the human being that is the seat of consciousness, personality, moral awareness, and spiritual experience is one of the most universal concepts in human thought. It appears in virtually every culture and religious tradition in human history. In Islam, the concept of the soul ruhu, or nafs, is central to the understanding of what a human being is, and it is directly relevant to the question of human origin. Science, for all its extraordinary achievements, has not been able to explain consciousness in terms of physical processes. It has not been able to identify the neural correlate of subjective experience. It has not been able to explain why there is something it is like to be a human being rather than nothing at all. It has not been able to account for the unity of conscious experience. The fact that the many inputs from different sense organs and different brain regions are somehow integrated into a single, unified field of experience. These failures are not for lack of trying. They reflect a fundamental limitation of the materialistic framework. The most coherent explanation for consciousness and for the many other capacities of the human being that cannot be explained in purely physical terms is the existence of the soul. The soul is not an appendage to the physical body. It is the primary reality of the human being. The body is the vehicle through which the soul interacts with the physical world. And the soul, as the Quran teaches, was breathed directly into the human being by Allah, making it a direct connection between the human being and the divine reality. This is why human beings have an innate awareness of Allah, an innate hunger for truth and beauty and goodness, and an innate sense of moral obligation. These are not products of evolution. They are properties of the soul, properties given to it by Allah when He breathed it into the first human being. Section 18. Other dimensional perspectives beyond the ordinary. The quantum reality and human observation. Modern physics has revealed that reality, at its most fundamental level, is far stranger than everyday experience suggests. Quantum mechanics, the physics of the very small, has shown that subatomic particles do not have definite properties until they are observed. The act of observation appears to affect the reality of what is observed, a finding that has profound implications for our understanding of consciousness and its relationship to the physical world. The famous Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics suggests that consciousness plays a fundamental role in the constitution of physical reality. If consciousness plays a role in the very fabric of physical reality at the quantum level, then consciousness cannot simply be a byproduct of physical processes. It must have a more fundamental status in the structure of reality. Some physicists, including Nobel Prize winner Eugene Wigner and theoretical physicist David Bohm, have suggested that consciousness may be the fundamental ground of reality, that the physical universe is in some sense a manifestation of a universal consciousness. From an Islamic perspective, this points toward the truth that all of reality exists and is sustained by the consciousness and will of Allah, and that human consciousness, as a direct gift from Allah, participates in this fundamental dimension of reality in a way that no other earthly creature does. The dimension of time and human uniqueness. Human beings have a unique relationship with time that is unlike that of any other known creature on earth. We are the only creatures that live simultaneously in three temporal dimensions. We remember the past, we experience the present, and we anticipate and plan for the future. We construct narratives about our lives that span from birth to death. We think about events that happened thousands of years before our birth and about consequences that will unfold thousands of years after our death. We imagine possible futures that have never existed and learn from hypothetical scenarios that never occurred. This unique temporal consciousness, this ability to step outside the immediate present and survey our lives as a whole, from a temporal vantage point that transcends any given moment, is deeply mysterious from an evolutionary standpoint. It goes far beyond what any survival need would require. A creature that can think about the deep past and the deep future, that can contemplate death and what lies beyond it, that can ask questions about the beginning and end of the universe. This creature is clearly operating on a dimension of existence that transcends the merely biological. This temporal depth of human consciousness is a feature of a soul that was created for eternity, not just for the brief span of a physical life, but for a relationship with Allah that has no end, the dimension of love and sacrifice. Love, genuine, self-sacrificial love, is another dimension of human existence that defies evolutionary explanation. Natural selection should favor selfish behavior that maximizes the reproductive success of the individual at the expense of others. And indeed, there is selfish behavior in the animal kingdom. But human love goes far beyond anything that evolutionary theory can explain. Human beings regularly sacrifice their own survival, their own comfort, their own reproductive opportunities, and their own lives for others, for children who are not their biological offspring, for strangers on the other side of the world, for abstract principles of justice and truth for their creator. Mothers and fathers sacrifice decades of their lives for their children, asking nothing in return. People risk their lives to save drowning strangers. Soldiers give their lives for their comrades or their principles. Saints and mystics renounce all worldly comfort to devote themselves entirely to Allah. This capacity for self-transcendent love, love that goes beyond survival, beyond reproduction, beyond the self entirely, is not an evolutionary adaptation. It is a property of the soul. It is a reflection of Allah's own attribute of love, for Allah, as Islamic theology teaches, is the all-loving, the most merciful. Human love, at its highest, is a participation in the divine love that is the source and ground of all creation. The near-death experience, glimpses of another dimension. One of the most intriguing bodies of evidence for the non-physical dimension of human existence comes from the study of near-death experiences, in short, NDEs. Hundreds of thousands of people around the world have reported experiences during cardiac arrest or other conditions of clinical death in which they seem to leave their physical bodies and enter a different realm of existence. These experiences are remarkably consistent across cultures, religions, and backgrounds: a sensation of leaving the body, a sense of peace and well-being, encounters with a brilliant light, meetings with deceased relatives, a life review in which one's entire life is experienced in a moment, and sometimes an encounter with a being of light or with a divine presence. Cardiologist Pim van Lommel conducted the most rigorous scientific study of NDEs to date, following more than 300 cardiac arrest patients over 8 years. His findings, published in the prestigious medical journal The Lancet, showed that a significant percentage of patients who were clinically dead with no measurable brain activity reported clear, vivid, and verifiable experiences during the period of clinical death. These findings challenge the assumption that consciousness is entirely a product of brain activity. They suggest, consistent with the Islamic account, that consciousness survives the death of the physical body and that there is a dimension of reality beyond the physical that the human soul has access to. Section 19. The human being as Khalifa, created for a purpose. One of the most profound concepts in the Islamic account of human existence is the designation of human beings as Allah's Khalifa, his representative, vicegerent, or trustee on earth. This concept is of central importance for understanding the question of human origin. because it establishes that human beings were not created accidentally or without purpose. They were created for a specific role, a specific mission, a specific relationship with Allah and with the rest of creation. A Khalifa is not merely a creature that happens to exist on earth. A Khalifa is a representative, a being who acts on behalf of another, who carries a trust, who is accountable for how they fulfill their role. To be designated as Allah's Khalifa is the most sublime honor that can be conferred upon any creature. It means that human beings are intended to manifest Allah's attributes in the physical world: His wisdom, His justice, His compassion, His creativity, His care for the created order. It means that human history is not a meaningless sequence of events driven by random forces, but a purposeful unfolding of a divine plan in which human beings are the central actors. This designation as Khalifa makes sense only if human beings were created in full form with full moral capacity, full rational capacity, full spiritual capacity, and full free will from the very beginning. A creature that was still half-formed, still in the process of evolving, still guided primarily by animal instinct, could not be a Khalifa. The Khalifa must be a being that is fully capable of understanding its trust, of choosing whether to fulfill it or betray it, and of being held accountable for its choices. This is the human being as Allah created, complete, dignified, capable, and responsible. Section 20. Human dignity. What our origin says about our worth. The question of human origin is not merely an abstract scientific or philosophical question. It has profound and immediate practical consequences, particularly for the question of human dignity and human worth. How we answer the question of where human beings came from determines how we understand what human beings are worth, and how they ought to be treated. If human beings are the product of an unguided evolutionary process, if they are, as Richard Dawkins famously said, just a gene machine, then human beings have no inherent dignity or worth. Their value is entirely relative, determined by their usefulness to others or by social consensus. A human being that is not useful, an infant, an elderly person, a person with severe disability, an unborn child, has, on this view, no inherent claim to protection or respect. The darkest chapters of modern history, slavery, colonialism, genocide, the Holocaust, were all justified, at least in part, by evolutionary reasoning, the argument that some groups of human beings were less evolved than others, and therefore less valuable. But if human beings were created deliberately by Allah, if every human being is the direct creation of the Most Wise, the Most Merciful, the Most High, then every human being has infinite and inviolable dignity. Every person is a creature of Allah, made with purpose, given a soul, endowed with reason and moral capacity, and destined for an eternal relationship with their Creator. The weakest, the poorest, the most marginalized human being on earth shares in this dignity equally with the most powerful and accomplished. This is the foundation of the Islamic concept of human rights, and it is a foundation that only makes sense if human beings were created, not evolved. Section 21. Addressing common objections, honest answers to hard questions. But science has proven evolution. One of the most common objections to the case made in this document is the claim that science has proven evolution, and therefore the creation account must be wrong. This objection rests on several misunderstandings. First, science has not proven evolution in the sense of establishing it as a certain, unquestionable fact. Evolution is a theory, a framework for interpreting evidence, and like all scientific theories, it is subject to revision and even rejection in the light of new evidence. Second, as documented throughout this study, the theory of evolution faces enormous and unresolved empirical, mathematical, and logical problems that its proponents rarely acknowledge in public discourse. Third, it is important to distinguish between different claims made under the label of evolution. The observation that living organisms change over time in response to environmental pressures, what is sometimes called microevolution, is well documented and uncontested. What is contested is the much stronger claim that all life on Earth, including human beings, descended from a common ancestor through random mutation and natural selection. This is the claim that faces the serious problems documented in this study, and this is the claim for which the evidence is genuinely inadequate. Religion and science are in conflict. Another common objection is the assumption that religion and science are fundamentally in conflict, that to accept the Islamic account of human creation is to reject science. This is a false dichotomy. Islam has never been in conflict with genuine, empirical science. The Quran actively encourages scientific inquiry, and the Islamic intellectual tradition has been one of the great generators of scientific knowledge in human history. What Islam rejects is not science, but scientism, the philosophical position that only materialistic explanations are valid, and that all questions must be answered within a purely physical framework. The problems with evolutionary theory discussed in this study are scientific problems raised by scientists, using scientific evidence and scientific reasoning. The case for intelligent design is made using the same methods of inference that scientists use every day, and the Islamic account of human origin is not contradicted by the genuine findings of empirical science. It is, on the contrary, deeply consistent with what science has discovered about the complexity, orderliness, and apparent purposefulness of the natural world. Why would Allah create through evolution? Some Muslim scholars have proposed that the theory of evolution might be reconciled with Islamic belief by suggesting that Allah used evolution as his method of creating human beings, that evolution was the process through which Allah brought about his creation. This is a position held by some contemporary Muslim thinkers, and it deserves respectful engagement. However, the argument of this document is that the evidence does not support this reconciliation, not because Allah could not have created through evolution if he had chosen to, but because the evidence indicates that he did not. The Quran's account of the creation of Adam is specific, detailed, and direct. It describes a unique, immediate act of divine creation, not a gradual process. The designation of human beings as Allah's Khalifa, the breathing of the divine spirit, the teaching of the names, the angel's prostration before Adam, all of these elements of the Quranic account describe a being that was created in full form with full capacity from the beginning. And, as the scientific evidence discussed throughout this document shows, the evolutionary account cannot adequately explain the origin of human consciousness, the soul, moral awareness, language, or spiritual intelligence. These require a direct act of divine creation. Section 22. The purpose of human existence. Why it matters. How we began. The question of how human beings came to exist is inseparable from the question of why they exist. If human beings evolved by chance from primordial chemicals through billions of years of random mutation, then human existence has no inherent purpose. We are, as the evolutionary materialist worldview suggests, an accident, a temporary arrangement of matter that will eventually dissolve back into the chemical soup from which it arose. Life has no meaning beyond what we arbitrarily choose to assign to it. There is no moral law, no divine guidance, no accountability, no ultimate justice, and no hope beyond the grave. But if human beings were created deliberately, in full form, by Allah, if every human being is a carefully designed creation of the most wise and most merciful, then human existence is saturated with purpose and meaning. The Quran states clearly that human beings were not created in vain, that the purpose of their creation is to worship Allah, to know Him, to serve Him, and through that worship and service to fulfill their role as His representatives on earth and to attain the ultimate happiness of nearness to Him in the next life. This purpose is not a burden, it is a liberation. It means that every human life, no matter how brief or seemingly insignificant by worldly standards, has infinite worth and infinite purpose. It means that suffering is not meaningless, it is a test, an opportunity for growth, a means of drawing closer to Allah. It means that death is not an ending, but a transition, the soul's journey from the temporary world to the eternal world for which it was created. It means that justice will ultimately prevail, that no act of goodness will go unrewarded, and no act of evil will go unpunished, in the perfect justice of Allah who sees all things and misses nothing. Section 23. The convergence, when all dimensions point in one direction. One of the most striking and significant features of the case presented in this document is the convergence of evidence from multiple, independent disciplines and perspectives. When scientific anomalies, philosophical arguments, logical analysis, anthropological observations, biological complexity, the information content of DNA, human consciousness, spiritual intelligence, near-death experiences, Islamic theology, Quranic revelation, and the testimony of human universal experience are all considered together. They do not point in different directions, as one might expect if the truth were unclear or ambiguous. They all point in the same direction. They all point toward a creator. They all point toward deliberate design. They all point toward a human being that was created complete, in full form, endowed with all the capacities necessary for its unique role as Allah's representative on earth. Not one of these perspectives, when examined honestly and without the predetermined commitment to a materialistic framework, supports the conclusion that human beings arose from random, unguided processes. Every perspective, from the most technical biochemistry to the most profound spiritual experience, converges on the same truth. Human beings were created by Allah. This convergence is itself a powerful argument. In science, when multiple independent lines of evidence all point to the same conclusion, that convergence is taken as very strong evidence that the conclusion is correct. A hypothesis that explains only one line of evidence is weak. A hypothesis that explains all the available evidence from every independent direction is strong. The hypothesis of deliberate divine creation of human beings created in full form by Allah explains every dimension of the evidence. The complexity of the human body, the information content of DNA, the irreducible complexity of biological systems, the universality of human language and art and morality and religion, the mystery of consciousness, the Quranic account of Adam's creation, and the human being's unique designation as Allah's Khalifa on earth. Section 24. Implications for modern life, living as a created being. The truth that human beings were created by Allah, not evolved by chance, has profound and practical Implications for every dimension of human life. It is not merely an intellectual conclusion to be accepted and then set aside. It is a truth that, when genuinely understood and internalized, transforms how a person sees themselves, how they see others, how they understand their responsibilities, and how they relate to their Creator. The implication for personal identity. When a person truly understands that they were created by Allah, that they are not an accident, but a deliberate creation, not a gene machine, but a soul, not a temporary arrangement of matter, but an eternal being of infinite worth, it transforms their sense of self. The person who knows they were created by Allah does not derive their identity from their wealth, their status, their nationality, their achievements, or the opinion of others. Their identity is grounded in something far more stable and far more profound. They are a creation of Allah, endowed by Allah with a soul designated by Allah as a representative on earth and destined by Allah for an eternal purpose. This knowledge is the foundation of the deepest and most stable form of human dignity and self-respect. The implication for relationships. When a person truly understands that every other human being was also created by Allah, that every person they encounter is a soul, a creation of the most merciful, endowed with the same divine breath and the same infinite worth, it transforms how they relate to others. It becomes impossible to genuinely hold this belief and at the same time to treat others with contempt, cruelty, or indifference. The recognition of the divine origin of every human being is the deepest foundation of compassion, justice, and respect for human rights. It is why the Prophet Muhammad taught that a believer is one from whose hand and tongue all people are safe. The implication for environmental responsibility. The Islamic concept of the human being as Allah's Khalifa on earth carries a profound implication for environmental responsibility. If human beings are Allah's trustees on earth, entrusted with the care of the earth and all its creatures, then the destruction of the natural world is not merely an economic or ecological problem. It is a betrayal of a sacred trust. The human being who was created by Allah and placed on the earth as his representative has a profound responsibility to care for the earth, to protect its creatures, and to ensure that future generations can enjoy and benefit from the creation that Allah has placed in their care. The implication for worship and gratitude. Perhaps the most immediate practical implication of knowing that we were created by Allah is the imperative of worship and gratitude. If human beings came into existence by accident, they owe nothing to anyone for their existence. But if they were created deliberately, with love and wisdom, by the most merciful, if every breath they draw, every heartbeat, every moment of consciousness and love and joy is a direct gift from their Creator, then gratitude and worship are not optional extras. They are the most natural, the most rational, and the most urgent response of a human being to the truth of their own existence. The Quran makes this point with unmatchable clarity. Human beings were created to worship Allah, not because Allah needs their worship. He is entirely self-sufficient and is not diminished or augmented by anything human beings do, but because worship is what human beings need. It is the fulfillment of their deepest nature, the nature that was placed in them by Allah from the moment of their creation. To worship Allah is to live in accordance with the fitrah, the natural disposition toward the divine that is written into every human soul. It is to be fully human, in the way that Allah designed human beings to be fully human. Section 25. Conclusion: the truth that sets the human being free. We have traveled a long distance in this study, from the biochemistry of DNA to the philosophy of consciousness, from the fossil record to the Quranic account of Adam's creation, from the mathematics of probability to the spiritual wisdom of the Islamic tradition, from the analogies of everyday life to the quantum dimensions of physical reality. And at every stop on this journey, the same truth has emerged clearly, consistently, and compellingly. Human beings were not the product of an unguided evolutionary process. They were not assembled accidentally from primordial chemicals over billions of years. They did not emerge from the random collision of matter and energy without purpose, without design, and without a creator. The evidence against this account, from science, from philosophy, from logic, from anthropology, from biology, from mathematics, from consciousness studies, from near-death experiences, and from the universal human experience of spiritual reality, is overwhelming. Human beings were created by Allah, the most wise, the most knowing, the most powerful, the most merciful. They were created in full form, with a body of extraordinary complexity and beauty, with a mind capable of language, reason, creativity, and moral judgment, with a soul breathed directly from the divine, with an innate awareness of their Creator, and with a capacity for love, worship, and eternal relationship with Allah. They were created complete, not as half-formed intermediates waiting for millions of years of random improvement, but as the crown of creation, designed from the first moment of their existence to know, love, and serve their Creator. This truth is not just a theological position or a scientific hypothesis. It is the most important truth that any human being can know. It is the truth that gives human life its meaning, its dignity, its purpose, and its hope. It is the truth that transforms how we see ourselves, how we see others, and how we see the world around us. It is the truth that calls us to live not as accidental creatures in a meaningless universe, but as beloved creations of the most merciful, placed on earth with purpose, guided by revelation, destined for eternity. When a person knows this truth, truly knows it, not just as an intellectual proposition, but as a living reality that shapes every thought and every action, they are free. Free from the despair of meaninglessness. Free from the arrogance of self-sufficiency. Free from the cruelty of treating others as accidents of nature rather than creations of Allah. Free to live with gratitude, with purpose, with compassion, and with the boundless hope of the believer who knows that the Creator who made them in full form also loves them infinitely, and has prepared for them a home of eternal happiness in His presence. This is the truth, and the truth, as Allah has promised, will always stand. Afterward, a note to the reader: this study has been written for every human being on earth who has ever looked at the night sky, or held a newborn child, or stood before the ocean, or looked into a dying parent's eyes, and felt the profound wordless certainty that there is more to existence than matter and energy, that there is meaning, purpose, design, and a Creator whose love and wisdom are written into every atom of the creation. If you are reading this and you have never considered the Islamic account of human origin before, if you have grown up believing, as modern education often teaches, that human beings are the accidental products of a blind evolutionary process, then this study invites you with respect and with love to reconsider, not to abandon reason, but to follow reason wherever it leads, not to abandon science, but to examine the genuine scientific evidence honestly, not to abandon your own experience, but to take your own experience of consciousness, beauty, moral obligation, and spiritual longing seriously as data about the nature of reality. The human being who asks, honestly and with an open heart, where did I come from? Why am I here? Who is my Creator? That human being is fulfilling the highest purpose of their existence. That question, genuinely asked and genuinely pursued, is the beginning of the journey toward Allah. And Allah, as the Quran promises, is near to every human being who turns toward Him, nearer than the jugular vein, present in every heartbeat, in every breath, in every moment of existence. He created you. He knows you. He loves you. And He is waiting for you. Allah says, we will show them our signs on the horizons and within themselves until it becomes clear to them that this is the truth. The Quran, chapter 41, verse 53.